Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, a man who has already planned out the last 4 words you'll ever hear on this podcast.
Tim Longo. Nice. That is a good one.
Yeah.
All those Gilmore Girls fans out there.
Yeah. I put that out there for them, which is you.
I'd be interested. I wonder how many people listen to the podcast.
Yeah, write in to Tim at devgameclub.com.
Yeah, that's not a real address. But.
That is not a real address.
Yeah, can't spoil anything though. I don't want to. I'm just too fresh.
Don't give them away. No, I mean I already know what our last 4 words would be on the podcast. It'll be good night, good night. That's what we say every time. But,
that's good. I like it. Yeah. Yeah. Apparently,
anyway.
Not to derail on Gilmore Girls. I could go on and on, but recommend it for those who. It's pretty good. The revival's good. So, TIE Fighter.
Back to TIE Fighter.
Yeah.
We actually, I didn't realize when we kind of divvied up how much we were going to play that we were going to basically finish the original game. Because we're playing like the collector's edition, the special edition, or some edition that has X packs, which is maybe something we should explain in and of itself. What an X pack is, because that's not it's basically DLC, but it came in a box. That pretty much explains it.
Blizzard kind of still does it in a way, but it's not the same. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, DLC definitely replaced it.
Yes, yeah, for sure. But it was a way to get another bite at the apple, as far as going back to your fans and saying, "Here's some more of the same game you love." But we've been getting the feedback that people do like to hear us recap the story. So let's try to cover what happened in these 4 battles. Since last time.
How much did we hit? We only hit it lightly in the first episode too, so I thought maybe I'd go back a little bit.
That's fine. Yeah, we didn't talk a lot about it. We kind of sprinkled it through, like, and Thrawn shows up, and and this happens, so it's not super direct.
Well, one of the interesting, cool things about TIE Fighter that I think always resonated with me, and I think a lot of my friends and Star Wars fans, is it's the timing of it. It takes place basically, and I believe including the 2 expansions, there's basically 2 expansions. There's Defender of the Empire, and then apparently, which I forgot about, in the Collector's Edition, they did 3 more battles or tours of duty for that particular product. So it was kind of an expansion, kind of just an add-on if you bought that special, basically giving you a reason to buy that special edition, right? Because you wanted more content.
Gotcha.
And I think that one's a little bit of a spoiler for you. One of the last battles takes place around Endor. So basically, the whole campaign takes place between Empire and Jedi, which is a cool, as far as like canonical Star Wars goes, it's a cool era, right? It's a really interesting time to be a bad guy. I'd say,
Sure.
Because it's after, obviously, between those 2 things, and the Empire was on a rise, and so I remember talking about that really being obviously a super intentional choice. So the first tour of duty, we talked a little bit about the first time, is the aftermath of Hoth, obviously super famous battle, and you're basically kind of chasing the rebels through that one.
Mopping up in space. And,
yeah. Thrawn shows up there, I believe, as I recall.
Yes.
But not pretty light on story otherwise. Then the next tour I alluded to last episode, the Seppian.
Yeah, Seppian, I think.
Seppian, Civil War. So this is sort of a little mini Civil War going on between these 2 alien races, and I definitely got confused during that about who was who and who were working for the Empire, But that basically was just that tour of duty dealt with that. So I don't think you really needed to dwell on those 2 races very much. I don't think they come back.
No, but it does at the end. You sort of start tying in the larger story, which is, I guess, Zarin is his name, right?
Oh, yeah, Harkoth and Zarin, right?
Right, Harkov and Zarin, and they're meeting with Mon Mothma turns up, I think, at that point.
Yeah, one of them
to say, hey, you could join with us.
Harkov,
it's Harkov. Yeah,
they make a deal to defect, basically.
Right,
to the rebels, and Harkov starts basically stealing technology, and that's sort of like the whole Emperor's Hand, a Secret Order of the Emperor. Starts dealing with all of that stuff, right, and unearthing who is actually defecting and how they're getting their equipment and their recon, their reconnaissance and all that stuff, which was pretty cool. Thrawn kind of comes back a little bit here and there, but he kind of takes a backseat after the third tour, which is Battle for the Frontier, where they're basically setting up a base, and then the fourth one, Conflict at Mylok 4. Let's see. This is about the diplomatic meeting, and you're starting to interact with sort of the different
They've got this
key players.
New hyper technology that we want.
Yep.
And it even has like maybe this one and the next one. There's even a demo of the new TIE Advanced. So you start bringing in this TIE Advanced. You're starting to bring in these craft that are not in the films.
Yep.
So more directly. It's starting to build up a little bit more about how the game progresses in terms of, because often, in the films, there's really just a couple of ships, right? There's the X-Wings and the TIE fighters, and there's a couple varieties of TIE fighters, but there's not like a half dozen different ships you see. So typically for games, we have kind of a longer power curve because we are many hours long, right?
Yeah.
So it starts bringing, you end up bringing that stuff in. So I guess, in the movies, they maybe have TIE fighters and TIE bombers, I guess. They should. And the TIE Interceptor. So, and then we're adding in the TIE Advanced and ultimately the TIE Defender.
Yeah, and I think, obviously all the 3 movies had been out by this time, so there was some, I don't know, retconning, maybe a strong word, but as of this era, if you were to go canonically in order, I believe the A-Wings were introduced in Jedi, so you hadn't seen an A-Wing in Empire Strikes Back. I don't think that Interceptors were shown there either. I think they were included in Jedi 2, but they were around, right? So they added them back in. But the Advance and the Defenders, and sort of speaking to the Advance thing, we talked about a little bit in the first episode, but one of the coolest aspects I remembered from before, and I still like about through the replay is their sort of progression of the Advanced and kind of introducing it like piece by piece in a way, or like element by element, and then eventually obviously building up to you being able to fly it. And then they do the same thing with the Defender later as well, toward the end of the campaign, kind of building this mystery and mystique about what these craft are, and that they're super, no pun intended, advanced and all that kind of stuff. So I just thought that was a cool touch, and it's a good example of, I think, good old fashioned, progression and build up of anticipation.
Right. And one of the things that and we probably get into this more after we kind of recap the story, is you also start to see them playing with their different sort of story modalities. There's basically multiple vectors of story that are happening. There's in-mission stuff, there's sort of the briefings and things like that just kind of setting up the story of what you're doing. But then there's also these cutscenes, which are third person and that your pilot couldn't possibly be at. So they're pure movies that are just kind of telling
more
you what's
cinematic.
going on.
Yeah.
Right. And as we get to 6 and 7, that's where those things start to blend together a lot more.
They bring... Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No.
Well, I was just going to say they bring in Vader, right, as a key, awesome NPC who, ultimately also is flying on missions with you in one of the Defenders. Right. And then he ends up being the conduit to talk to the Emperor, and the Emperor's giving him orders, and the Emperor even mentions in one of the cutscenes, he mentions the secret order that you are working for, and you kind of feel like you're really a part of the story because you're that operative that's out there flying missions and figuring out this secret stuff, which having the Emperor talk about your group basically is a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a storytelling technique that I really appreciate. That the Secret Order is this area where they're crossing over, from the main storyline with the Vader and the Emperor over into sort of your story, your military career, and that's it kind of all starts to unify at that point, which is really, really nicely done.
Yeah, it's simple. It's simply done, but I think that's really it was a good way to do it, right? Like I said earlier, in that one Civil War thing, knowing a little bit about how they develop these games, because as I mentioned, I was a QA on XVT, and I kind of knew a bunch of the mission designers and stuff. And then we had some friends that ended up going over and working at Totally Games on like X-Wing Alliance and some things in the future. But they basically give a designer their own tour of duty to figure out, right? And so that designer sometimes will have their own ideas that will delve into a specific topic, but it doesn't always wrap into the macro story that much, you know what I mean? Or it might not. And so some of these feel like kind of all-inclusive, self-contained kind of little mini campaigns because of that, I think. But the ones that wrap into this toward the end of the game, I think, are definitely the better ones because they had a macro story there. But eventually in the battle, the fifth tour of duty, you capture Harkov, who is essentially the traitor to the Empire, the defector. There's some rebel arms deals that happen around there. And then the last two are basically dealing with the Defender prototypes and revealing those, getting the beam technology, as well as discovering a special missile that the rebels have. The what are those things called? Mag
pulse.
Yeah. Mag pulse missiles. Yeah. And then the coolest culmination is toward the end. You get into a Defender. You're actually trapping some capital ships. It's the first time you really start dealing with some capital ships is in the last two, maybe just the last one, which you actually feel like you did a lot more of in the X-Wing games where you're actually blowing up capital ships.
Right.
You finally get to do that, take out a Calamari cruiser, Star Destroyer, a frigate, and Vader is flying as I guess you're his wingman.
Right.
And you eventually save the Emperor.
You're number 1 and he's number 6, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
And you do race. Yeah, you kind of race ahead. The idea is that the TIE Defender is the only ship that's fast enough because the big ships aren't fast enough. I guess there's too much mass to move quickly. So you need to be in these nimble little fighters to zip ahead to where they're going to transfer the Emperor to Zarin's ship. Which I guess is basically setting up the sort of X-Pax because he gets away. That's basically the end of the storyline. A lot of these missions were a lot tougher.
These later ones, yeah.
They start to get a lot more difficult, and you have to know a lot more of the keyboard. So there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, we've kind of talked a little bit about the storytelling techniques, how they have this sort of cutscene level macro story, which is just kind of lightly touched on from time to time to just kind of keep the engine going, keep it warm, so that it's ready to go at the end when they're going to kind of ramp it up all at once. And then they have the Secret Order stuff going on. I looked that up. I was curious to know what the mechanism was for that because I felt like in a lot of missions I was getting a bunch of bonus goals but not really advancing in the Secret Order. It turns out that is purely a cumulative point unlock. So it's like once you've made this many points as a pilot, you get promoted to the next circle or next whatever. What
kind of points, though? What do you mean? The ranking? The military ranking? Or do you mean how many secondary objective points you get?
So you get points for every... you get points for finishing missions on different difficulty levels. So it's like 2,500 points or whatever to finish. And the debriefing, they'll actually tell you how many points you got or what your percentage of shots were. So you'll get 2,500 points for finishing the mission on easy, say. And then you'll get 200 points for every A-Wing you killed and, 150 points for every TIE fighter you killed if you're killing TIE fighters, and et cetera, et cetera. So you just get these points. And it just keeps track of them and just stores them in your character, and you get you get more points. There are deductions for things like missed shots. Every time you miss a shot, you lose a point. One laser bolt equals 1 point lost if it doesn't hit anything.
Interesting.
So it's kind of strange because it
arbitrary.
It felt very arbitrary feeling, because it felt like at the beginning I was progressing kind of in parallel with getting the medals for the missions. Like, I'd finish a battle, I'd get a medal, and I'd get another level in the Secret Order, and it seemed to be around the same time. And it might have been that I was just getting bigger point bonuses then, and it just happened to trigger. So it just was a happy accident.
Yeah.
Because when I didn't get any further, I was like, I wonder how far you can go in that Secret Order. It was like, third circle or whatever. Turns out, there's, I don't know, like 10. They start having names after a while, and you get the tattoos and yada yada.
Yeah.
So you weren't really missing out on anything. One thing I do like is that, as I mentioned to you, you just don't know what you missed.
Yeah.
It doesn't these days they'd have an achievement for got to be the Emperor's voice or whatever, which is the higher levels. And you'd be kind of directed towards, you haven't done enough.
Yeah.
And it would probably be a lot less mysterious about what you had to do to get it. We tend to hold hands about that stuff. So, anyway, that's all kind of a distraction from my main point, which was that you also get a mission at some point, which is just the Secret Order mission. It's just the Emperor's dude there who's like, you got to go out and,
Oh, yeah, that's right. I made a note of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was super, it was a nice moment.
You kind of cross that stuff over. Yeah, it is a good moment.
Because you don't see the military dude there, and you're like, oh, what's going on? And isn't that the one where you get double-crossed?
It is. Yeah, you're out there.
You don't know what's going to happen.
And you've got two other, he basically says,
be ready
that was a
if
great
you have
mission. To call in.
Yeah.
Be ready if you have to call in reinforcements, and they start taunting you like, "Oh, do you want to call for reinforcements?"
Right, which I hadn't had to or done yet at all, is to call in reinforcements, because I think you maybe lose points for it or something. But
you probably do. I never did it until then.
Yeah.
And then even then, I didn't do it for quite a while into it. It's basically like go out and inspect some cargo and destroy it.
Yeah,
and in the middle of that,
trap,
they decide they're going to come after you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and the VO is very good there too. I remember the other pilots and their taunts are sort of like
right.
sinister.
They feel appropriately sinister.
Yeah, there's an interesting. Yeah, I don't truthfully know if I still have it completely all straight, but there's just a lot of fun backstabbing and kind of like just the defection and kind of all of that whole dynamic is just it's very in character. It feels Star Warsy. It feels like the kinds of things that I want to do as a member of the Empire, and experience, and just kind of that weird military espionage kind of stuff is really cool, and I feel like for a flight sim, not maybe necessarily expected. They had a little bit of this kind of stuff in Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe, I believe. I vaguely remember, because it had kind of a Spec Ops kind of feel to it, but not anywhere near this kind of depth, which, it was delightful to kind of relive this stuff, I gotta say.
Yeah, and the one story thing I kind of wished for was at the end, having now seen the Emperor be weak, they kidnapped him, which is a bit of a stretch for me.
Some stretches, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of wanted him to just kill everybody who was involved. Yeah, that's true. That's possible. That's a possible twist. Like, that maybe he was just going along so that they would know, so that they could trap, because he knew Vader would come. So that's a good point. But there's like a Madness of King George kind of aspect where you kind of expect him just to have everybody killed who was involved.
He's just blowing ships up with his hands.
Because just shooting lightning out the window, like just kill all these TIE defenders because they've seen me at my weakest, ostensibly. I don't know.
If only somebody would have thought of Jedi powers while you're flying a ship. That's just
God! If somebody come up with
interesting idea. And I also found that pretty anticlimactic that the last mission feels like There's like I guess they had that cinematic where kind of had that award ceremony, right, or that the medal ceremony at the end from the Emperor, but that was kind of it. You're like, I just saved the Emperor. Like this is the end. So I felt like they could have done a little bit more.
But it also it breaks. I mean, it does good story. Star Wars story kind of breaks. I mean, even just having a medal ceremony, obviously very Star Wars. But there's also and these guys got away. You know, I don't know what his names are, and and Thrawn is going after him, and you're like, oh, that's a total Star Wars thing, right? I mean, that is the most Star Wars thing, right? Yeah. I mean, it's essentially what's going on at the end of Empire.
The melodrama of cliffhangers.
Yeah, of like, somebody got away. I mean, this is, I don't know why, certain writers of games in the Star Wars tradition will often have a character who just disappears at some point in the plot, and you don't know what happened to him. That happens all the time in Star Wars games, sir.
I feel like I don't remember what happens to Zarin or Harkov. I guess does he die? I mean, there's that scene where somebody's choking him, Vader. Yeah, I don't remember if he
chokes him out.
I feel like
dead.
A couple of these characters, maybe it's Zarin, I'm thinking of, does come up in some of their, extended fiction stuff during this, during.
Well, he's going to. I think he's going to be in the missions we play in the future.
No, I mean outside of this game. You know what I mean? Okay. Like I think in the comics or something. But he's kind of a little bit of a minor but infamous, villain kind of character. But
anyway, so I mean, in the end, I guess I really appreciated those crossing over from the sort of different modes of storytelling so that it actually becomes unified at the end. It's, why have I been following this story about Vader and the Emperor and all this stuff and these things I couldn't have seen? And it gets to this point where it all just kind of braids together into the final couple of missions.
Surprisingly
well. You're actually chasing after. Yeah, extremely well. Unusually well for the time.
Yeah, for the time, for sure. The other kind of theme around the story that I wanted to mention and that I put in my notes is it was refreshing to kind of have, I don't know how to say it exactly, but just to have a pure military story. I feel like these days, because I don't know, maybe of cinema's influence on games or wannabe filmmakers or what have you, and that we've gotten into this trap where even a military story we try to kind of make super bomb, and obviously it's the era, right? So they're not going to spend a lot of money on these crazy cinematics or what have you. But you take Call of Duty or something where it's essentially a military story, but you just add a bunch of stuff to it, right, to make it bigger than it really kind of is or should be. And I think that's why I always like the Rainbow Six games as well. They kind of just stay in their lane, and focus on what the fantasy fulfillment around this specific thing is. And of course, you could say, well, Call of Duty is very successful and Rainbow Six maybe not as much, so maybe that's proof that you do want to go big. But for me, at least, playing this, I just was refreshing and kind of like all the objectives, everything really dealt with the military aspects of what was going on. And it's kind of a nuanced point, but
and the
it was just refreshing.
Our medals and stuff.
Medals, yeah. It's all very cohesive and consistent. And again, I just really appreciate any game that fully relishes the fantasy fulfillment of what it is. You're playing a TIE fighter pilot, and like they hit each of the aspects of what you'd want to do as that pilot. So I don't know. It's kind of a nice.
I mean, on that though, I will say that the simulation feels like there's. Okay, so the pure flight mechanics feel like there's a lot of depth, just because there's a lot of control over energy balancing,
I want to talk about that
and throttle management. Matching throttle and then backing off a little bit. These are the sorts of things that I specifically mapped on my controller because I knew I'd be doing them all the time. And then different targeting modes, but there's these sort of things off to the side. I mean, you mentioned the beam weapon. That you get. I never used that. I don't really know why you'd use it. So that's a thing.
Yeah, well, I can. Yeah.
You can tell me in a sec. There's basically wingman commands that are fairly complex. I mean, there's like 8 things that you can tell somebody to do.
Yeah, old school.
Way too many. I mean, I did maybe one of those things at one point, because I was too far away from a thing, so I had to get somebody there.
Yeah.
But there were 6 or 7 options there, and I didn't do any of them.
Yeah.
Another thing I only did once, maybe twice, was component targeting.
Yep.
Where you can cycle through targets on a larger ship, so not like a craft the size.
I think
of what
they even
you're
tell you
flying,
to,
but
right?
They do specifically tell you to target the laser turret on a Star Destroyer.
It's like on a platform or something, or both, actually. Yeah.
In the final, it's in the final couple battles, and so there's a wide array of options, but I don't feel like those options are richly explored in a way that they are all viable options.
Yeah.
Like it's not like you're going to go into a mission and I'm the sort of player who uses my wingman a lot, and I'm going to use my wingman to great advantage. It doesn't feel like it's there. That's strong enough.
I mean, it's definitely it's a good point. I can't disagree.
Or the beam weapon, for example. I mean, if the beam weapon did something like, if I beam weapon on somebody, it'll refill my missiles. I mean, that would make no sense, right, physically, but it would be mechanically interesting. I never used the beam weapon.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess what I was going to say is, I definitely understand your point, and especially by modern standards. I think, like, if we were to go back and pull, we talked about this in the first episode, sort of the landscape of flight sims, this is probably actually mild compared to a lot of other stuff, right, as we talked about.
Yeah, like a Falcon 3 or whatever.
Yeah, I think as the landscape of the time, I think it was kind of ironically one of the more accessible, like, sims, especially in the PC, space. But there's definitely kind of primary, secondary, and tertiary systems in the game. And I think a lot of the ones you're talking about are those tertiary ones that I think modern day wise, we've just basically cut those, right? Like we've lopped them off, and we just kind of focus mainly on the primary and some on the secondary. But they're really definitely not necessary. However, what I will say on the harder, and this is my memory because I haven't played on the harder difficulties in many years, but on the harder difficulties, and if you are getting all the bonus objectives and all of the secondary objectives, and the bonus objectives, as maybe we haven't even talked about, those are not revealed to you, so you don't know them unless you...
I did find a lot.
You find them, right? But if you're not actually looking on facts or what have you, you actually have to discover them, and sometimes they're pretty obvious. But some of those actually get pretty complicated. And this is, this is a reason I think having maybe like read on or something would be interesting, because going through and actually being a completionist in this game, you actually do, you'll benefit by using all that stuff, especially the wingman commands, because you end up having to really micromanage and send them to go do a thing while you're doing another thing, because you need to time things at the same time. And like it's an opt-in depth for sure. You don't need to use that stuff, but if you, and this is I wanted to go back to a macro point that I made last episode. This session was fun for me because that notion I was talking about before of like mastering things and like getting into, like really delving deeply into the systems and using them for various purposes and feeling like you're really becoming a pilot as the story is telling you you're becoming a pirate was just really fun for me. But yeah, you definitely don't need to use that stuff. The beam weapon, if you turn the beam weapon on a target that you're firing at, then they just stay in front of you, and you can...
Right. I kind of worked out that that's probably what would happen. By that point, I hadn't incorporated that into, like, the things that I used all the time. And so,
it's hard to add it in that late.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have it on a button on the joystick, and the keyboard is not, not intuitive to do... I mean, it's just...
No,
like,
I
have to look down to the keyboard, right? And now I've lost the thing in front of me, and it's like, okay, that doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
I mean, I totally understand, and I remember, and this thing has a lot of things that flight sims at the time would have, which was like having different screens for different things, and in this case, being able to look through different windows, which is something I would do occasionally accidentally. because the number keys are right above, T and Y and R and stuff. And so occasionally I would accidentally hit like a 6 and I'd be like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm looking at now. So it was just kind of, it would be fun then when I was in a kind of doldrum of a mission to just kind of, sit there and play with things like that. But in the heat of battle, I guess if you played it again and again and again, you might...
That's what I mean.
You might find yourself, going into that depth.
The mastering it. It's the puzzle aspect of it all, right? Where you're trying to do the perfect play of, the perfect playthrough of a mission or something like that, and you can really get down to the brass tacks of it. But it's definitely like I bet you 5% of the people ended up ultimately using that stuff, because you don't need to. Especially I'm playing on easy, so I definitely don't need to do that stuff. But it might come up later in the expansions, because when you start fighting. A little bit with A-Wings, but I forget if we start fighting more defenders or something, they're so nimble, and sometimes hard to get a beat on that something like the beam weapon actually can be handy, to keep them right in your, because I found, when you're fighting some of those craft, they're really able to get away from you and get out of your view easily. I'm turning the cockpit off so I have a better view and stuff, but there's just a lot of keys. It's just not the areas.
Yeah, I guess if it had taught me at all what was going on with those, that might have helped. And maybe actually that's if you go and do the...
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah, if you go and do the battle training. In fact, at one point, the briefing dude...
he tells you, right?
It's like, well, while you were practicing on the TIE Defender, this is what's been going on, And I thought that was great, because it's a subtle reminder to a player, hey, there are other things you could be doing. There's ways to improve your experience, or just to get better at the things that we're going to throw at you. You can go do this kind of safe thing, etc.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask you about the damage system and how much that impacted you, and. Because I had forgotten about that as well, and for those who aren't playing along, they have a pretty elaborate damage system that goes into the game as well. So you can take different types and amounts of damage, and probably randomly they take certain systems away from you. So it could be anything from your targeting system to your flight controls, your lasers, your missiles. Like all of that stuff basically will turn off based on getting hit, and it will eventually come back on, but sometimes you'll get so damaged that your instruments will actually break and crack, and the glass will shatter.
They'll never repair.
And then you'll never come back. So sometimes you're flying blind. If you're choosing to continue, you're flying a mission blind, which for me was just another one of those touches where you're like, oh yeah, I'm in this tin can in the middle of the space, and my instrument's broken. I can't get a beat on anybody because my targeting computer's broken, and I'm just going to make do. So, I was actually going to failure. So this is good. This is kind of a part of the failure equation for this game is that there's gradations of failure. There's the sorts of things where things go offline and come back, and then there's of course all this kind of cracking and all that stuff, and then there are actually different ways you can fail a mission that are bad. And we'll get to those last, I guess. But I did have a number of different things. I definitely had. I lost control of the craft at times, sometimes leading to my death because I was headed towards something big and with a lot of lasers on it, and couldn't do anything. I wasn't really good at shield management in terms of putting shields forward or back. Because I couldn't remember the keys, so I just would end up being like, well, I guess I'll turn and fly away now because there's more shields on my butt. I think it's just S for shields.
Oh, okay. Well,
pro tip.
There you go. Too far away from RT and Y. And then I did have, I definitely had cases where I lost weapon systems. It's like, oh, I can't fire my lasers right now, or I can't get a lock, or, I'm not getting feedback about when I'm going to hit. And things like that. And if if I don't remember, it might be the D key for damage, you can go and look and it'll tell you, oh, okay, this thing's going to be back in 8 seconds or whatever. And you can prioritize like, oh no, it's really important that I get, like, I'm okay not having this, but I really need my lasers, or whatever.
Yeah, I actually totally forgot about that. I didn't even look at the damage key. I have to go back and do that.
Yeah, so if you go into that, because at one point I didn't know if it was just not working, like what had happened. So I brought up the manual.
Yeah.
I'm like, is this one of those things like the gun recharging that I've just forgotten?
Yeah, you've turned your engines off, and you're like,
yeah, exactly. I've accidentally done something stupid, and I hit a wrong key at some point while I was frantically trying to target. And I'd go and I'd look and be like, oh, there's this whole other screen. Let me look at that. And it's like, oh, look at that. There's 4 red entries. Everything's broken.
Yeah.
I have no flight control. I've lost this weapon or that weapon.
Man, they had so much stuff.
It is. It is. The simulation depth is really there. And then the kind of paying off with that. I mean, the screens are all kind of gross, but because they're all just like text. They're all like the in-mission pause screen of like, oh, here's 9 entries you can go down like you're dealing with your computer's BIOS or something like that. So they're all kind of gross that way. And I actually couldn't ever use the in-game keyboard layout with the K key because coming back from that would always crash the game on my computer.
Oh, really?
The game would just crash. Which, 20-year-old game. Fine.
Yeah. I can't use our hardware acceleration.
No,
crashes.
I tried that too. Yeah, same thing. I was curious. I didn't really think it would work. I do have a machine downstairs that it would probably work on, but I'm not going to turn that on.
I'm kind of glad though because I'm happy that I want to playing it in just kind of old school, non-hardware just software emulating. I think it's a nice way to get the nostalgia for it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I bet the hardware accelerated is like the X-Wing Alliance engine, basically, for Red.
Yeah.
So, which was the last title, which I think I actually have a thanks credit or something in.
Yeah,
it was the
one
released. Yeah, it was the one released when I was actually after I had got to LucasArts. So.
Well, the other sort of other than the damage system, which is deeper than you'd think, the other one we've hit on a little bit here and there is just the energy management, which this series, X-Wing and TIE Fighter and XVT and all the games, I think have always been really lauded for. I don't remember if Wingman did any, or Wing Commander did any of this, but just the whole management of stuff, like. To totally understand it's not for everybody and it's probably going to be a pain in the butt for a lot of people and is it a system that would be shipped today? Maybe not, though I'm hoping that there's still some indie games out there and maybe Star Citizen or something will deal with some of this, but I just get super anal about that stuff and love like just really min-maxing the energy bars, and for those who aren't playing you can control the energy allotment between your shields, if you have them, lasers, engines, beam weapon, and then you also have an additional button or options where you can actually reroute the current energy you have between lasers and shields. And so you have this other sense, this other axis.
I never did that either, but you could. That's right.
Well, so in the later missions when they started getting hard, and I remember this being kind of like a pro tip that we would always do in QA as well, is as soon as you get in the mission, you reroute all of your energy from your lasers to your shields. You basically get double shields, right? So you have 2, which I have a minor point on the design side to mention later about that, where you have the inner ring and then the outer ring of shields. You can fill both of those up, and so you reroute all your lasers. You get double shields, so you're super powerful or super protected, and then you just charge your lasers while you're flying to the next destination. You always have those in reserve. But a little minor note that I'm sure it was intentional, but the fact that you only start with 1 ring of shields when they could have started you with 2 is an interesting, small, I would hope, intentional choice of, basically making you choose how you're going to manage your energy and not giving you, the full complement of everything right off the bat. They could have easily done that and just say, oh, you start with full charge. But now when you start, because you don't have a full charge, you then have to make choices about what you're going to do with your energy.
And you have to do them immediately, which is,
right.
Since you're often dropped off, for story reasons, you're not close enough to the action, right? They want to hold the sort of big ships back, and it's like having the generals back, on hillsides far away from the battle, while all the redcoats kind of battle down on the field. It's very similar in that way, and they want you to be making decisions right away to feel like you're doing something and not just having dead air. So you're there, and for me, I did forget about that. Even though I mapped it onto my stupid joystick, I totally forgot by the time I would have used it, because you don't have your ships don't have shields early in the game, and they never reinforce these things, at least not in the main missions. So I would always just bump up the recharge and maybe even bump down the laser, so they would have more engine power.
Yeah.
Just so I was powering up those shields as much as I could on the way to the target.
Yeah.
And if there was a race against time, I would still do that, and I just drop the lasers altogether, so I was getting as much out of my engines while still doing a lot of recharge. So immediately I'm making those kinds of decisions. But often, and this is the unfortunate part, often that's as a response to failure. Like, I failed the beginning of this mission 4 times, and, I don't, let me try this, let me try that, and so you start experimenting with things at that point. That's actually how I lucked into the wingman commands at one point, because I was like, I can't get there, but I know that all the other guys are over there because they were told to be, so I could send them after it.
Yeah. Yeah, divide and conquer.
Yeah.
What were some of your hardest missions? Do you remember any particular?
There was one that we both ran into where there was a platform from which a ship was taking off.
Oh, jeez.
And I don't know why this happens, but for me, I had been playing for a while and got to that mission, and every time I would get anywhere near the platform, that what's that, a Corellian ship, right? It's like the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah, Corellian. Yeah.
Corellian freighter or whatever it is. It would take off directly into the platform. It would steer itself down through the platform, and it would just explode. It would just blow up, and then it would fail the mission. And I'd be like, "What? I didn't do anything." And I kept thinking it was a puzzle. So I'd try from a long range, try to shoot the things down with missiles or whatever.
Probably 10 times for me. I was like,
I did it quite a number of times. Well, and it kept saying, how could Imperial pilots fail against the Narwhal? And I'd be like, that's a question I'm asking myself a lot lately. How can they succeed against the Narwhal? That's my question. So it was that was a little frustrating. So that one was bad. And then there were kind of a few sprinkled in at the end. There was another one that had a platform that was very difficult, where there were things that you again had to disable without them getting out of.
Yeah,
they all had hyperspace engines. You had to kind of come around to them in the right way, and
that
for me,
one
I ended
with
up doing some long range missiles and stuff.
Oh yeah. That's the same one that comes to my mind too, where there's the 3 different ships. You're not sure which one. No, that's the one with Harkov. But there's a few different ships on that platform later on a platform like that, and they're all leaving different directions or doing different things. And then there's
you can't go the short way to get to them because there's this platform in the way that's going to just blow you.
The platform's really hostile.
Lasers coming off of that.
Yeah. So just timing all of that. Any of the disabling ones, because I had a couple times when, speaking of wingmen, where I would disable a ship and then they would accidentally blow it up after I had disabled it, and then I'd fail the mission even though I had succeeded at that objective. While we were waiting to board it. So. You can do ignore craft or something, but
so the other level of failure I didn't get to, and I don't know if you had any of these things happen, was that there were some cases where it would restore your pilot. Did this happen to you?
No. What do you mean?
So I failed enough that they couldn't recover my body.
Oh, on the mission?
Right, and they had a funeral. There's a little scene, and they have a little funeral for you.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
And then it loads in, and it says, okay, we restored your pilot. And then there was a second one that happened where I was captured by the rebels and sent to a prison planet.
Shut up! Are you serious?
Yeah, and there's a cutscene. Yeah, and there's animals flying. Yeah, there's like pteranodons flying around. There's a big mountain or a big prison and everything.
I don't know if I must have had that happen at some point. But
oh yeah,
wow.
I'm sure back in the day. Yeah, but it was really good. I mean, I could see you could easily skip it too, because you have a tendency to just hit the space bar and skip cutscenes too at the ends of battles. But yeah, those were a couple things that happened to me, which was like another level of failure beyond you failed the mission. It's like, no, your whole career failed.
You're gone, yeah.
And then the first thing that they do is they say, oh, well, we restored that for you, which is just really funny. It's a dig at you to be like, well, you really blew it, man. I mean, you blew it. But, it's okay. It's really no different than if you just had a normal failure, in terms of effectiveness of the game. But it's there were good moments, and they were like these well-rendered scenes, I mean, for the time. So it was really amusing. I mean, they were like the short cutscenes between Vader and the Emperor or whatever. I thought that was great. Another level of failure.
That's cool. It's a little bit
any
like
other topics you want to hit this time?
Let's see. I think we hit the main ones that I had notes for. The last kind of meta one that, I always love to throw these random ones in there, but I wanted to ask you about the engine, the rendering engine, and kind of if there anything to mention there, because it seems super simple. I assume it's based probably on their World War II stuff, but maybe not. But there's just not a lot going on in that.
No, there's not.
Engine.
Let's talk about the technology next time.
Okay, let's focus on that.
Just to have a solid topic to hit, because there are some things, there are some interesting things, but I don't think it pays off super well in this game in particular. It's really interesting because they were going from more detail to less detail. Like they don't have any terrain to render. Yeah. So there's some interesting stuff, but I will make a note to talk technical stuff.
For next time maybe we can hit some of that stuff. I just there's something, and I'm kind of thinking a little bit about maybe Wing Commander and some of those more arcadey flight sims, but also like even our games and Starfighter games and the Rogue Squadron games. Like there still is something to me about just enough of a sim in a Star Wars space, science fiction game where you're just gliding through space next to a Star Destroyer, or whether they're wingmen with you who are in their own ships, and there's just this feeling to it. It just feels so cool and unlike any other Star Wars experience to me, because so many of the Star Wars games, I'm not even sure I can think of another one that is so, I guess, like trying to simulate what it would really be like to do a thing, because we always tended to leverage and lean on the melodrama of the films. Right. So it's like, we're trying to emulate the films, but it's through the lens of Republic Commando or through the lens of Kyle Katarn.
I think we did more to lead the player as well. Here, you actually have to pay attention to the radio chatter to know what to do next.
You got to do a lot of stuff on your own.
And there's no objective tracker. There's no big glowy arrow in the sky or cheese wedge from the Rogue Squadron games to tell you you're heading the wrong direction.
Do you use the map at all?
I did not use the map at all.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't start using it until the end, but you don't really need it that much. But
aware of the map, so another key I did not check out.
There's this whole 3D map. It shows elevation, and you can zoom around, and it's interesting. You should check it out.
That's a holdover from the flight.
Yeah. You probably should look at it just if we're going to talk about tech. But I just the macro point here is really just the concept of, this is unlike, again, any other Star Wars experience I can think of. It's literally trying to simulate the day in the life of this, this character or your pilot. And X-Wing, all of the X-Wing games are that way. And it just isn't a thing. Like even Battlefront, the new Battlefront, like it's still got all the melodrama around it. And just gliding through space, pretty chill, like literally nothing's happening, and you're just flying toward this speck in the distance. It's just very interesting to me and very fresh in a weird way for being as a Star Wars fan. So I mean, if I definitely recommend people who are fans, but haven't played these games, at least try them a little bit, because they're just such an interesting, different experience.
Yeah, they really are, and we should definitely talk about some ways in which I think that the technical constraints of the time also limit the way they're able to do a sort of true film presentation with things like scale.
Yeah,
because it definitely
doesn't
feel
capital ships.
Yeah, the scale
wrong.
of the capital ships feel really wrong compared to what you're used to seeing on screen. So, okay, let's take a quick break, and then I have a few pieces of feedback.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We're going to read some emails and some feedback from the reviews and stuff. You can get in touch with us at devgameclub@gmail.com. All Gilmore Girls related requests go to gilmoregirls@devgameclub.com. So. First off, I have an email from Brian Taylor, friend of mine, friend of the cast. He has a couple of points. He says maybe part of the reason X-Wing and TIE Fighter fit so well into a framework that had previously been used for World War II simulations is that the film sequences they're based on were heavily based on World War II films.
That's a
I
good point.
remember hearing that for the original film, Lucas stitched together old World War II movies as examples of the space fights, the way he'd score the film with classical music as a placeholder for the composer. He claims that's what he did in this, and he gives some links and stuff like that. He said he was a little skeptical that this would be true, but then he watched, and he sends in a clip of Tora, 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 where they're dropping bombs on these series of bridges, and watching it. I'll put a link in the show notes. I was like, oh yeah, that's pretty convincing.
Yeah. I feel like this was covered in a documentary or maybe some director's commentary or something where George actually was sharing this same info, and actually shared some of the scenes. I could be totally high on that, but yeah.
I think that it's also true that he went and made a World War II pilot film
afterwards
after he did the prequels. So part two was that he said the Prima strategy for this game. Strategy guide for this game is so weird, and he wrote about it a long time ago, and he gives a link for that as well. And he says, it actually says on page 79, I pressed F9 to increase my cannon recharge rates. And he points out that it must have been a challenge to write a strategy guide for a game that doesn't take place in corridors and rooms, indoor or outdoor, but in fairly unbounded three-dimensional space.
Yeah.
Which is very true. I can't imagine writing... Like, people write walkthroughs with basically, this is my strategy for this, for this mission. If you're going to get all the, to get the best score, this is what I did. Type walkthroughs. But, under the time pressure of a strategy guide, I can't imagine that would be an easy task. So, good points in both cases, Ryan.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Whenever you have the strategy guide people come in, that usually happens very close to the end of a project, and they have to write these, I worked on a couple big open world games, and these books come out, and they're like 500 pages at, 8.5 by 11, and I'm just baffled that they can do that. The strategy guides for the Starfighter games are quite short in comparison, but... it's still amazing to think of putting that all together in a short period of time, and usually designers help a lot with that process.
Mm-hmm.
So
and QA, yeah,
and QA, who are the best at the game usually at that point. Okay, and then we have one from Kurt in Carlisle, PA. He says, "Hey guys, big fan of the show. I've been listening since Tim's visit on DLC, and have checked out the back episodes since.
Oh, nice.
Interviews with Ken Levine and especially Jonas Flosser. Wow, what a treat. I also enjoyed Brett's recent turn on Shall We Play a Game? Thank you. It's so interesting hearing your perspectives on games new and old. You do a great job bringing us along when playing these games, none of which I've ever played so far. And he also says, count me among those who go ahead and tell me the plots, because he's a new dad. And congratulations, Kurt, for being a new dad, but he probably won't have time. He said, I really just wanted to send a quick note after last week's episode on TIE Fighter. The discussion of 90s sims, keyboard F-row guides, took me back to when I was a kid. I spent way too many hours playing games like Silent Service, F-15 Strike Eagle, Their Finest Hour Battle of Britain, a total incomprehensible space shuttle simulator, and my favorite, B-17 Flying Fortress. Thanks for the weekly shots of nostalgia. Keep up the good fight.
I remember Sub. Yeah,
and there's a PS. There's a PS. My favorite part of this podcast is Tim saying, "Aw, geez."
Yeah, that's a coined Tim phrase, I guess.
That's a healthy part.
I say it to my wife all the time. Jeez. Those. Oof. I remember as a youngster as well some of those submarine sims that I just got into my head that I was going to be a submarine captain, and I was going to go deep, and no pun intended, and just really get into these things, and they were so dense and and it's
was the density. You think what torpedoed that for you?
And I heard it coming. I was just like, as it was like, oh no, I just teed that up for him. He's gonna no. Well done. But yeah, I mean, can you just simulating a submarine? You're freaking under the water, just going along and just try and get. Oh man, Sims, where did they go?
I know
they're out there. They're still out there.
They are still out there, and actually there were some that came up through Twitter and stuff like that, and I'll try to remember to bring those up.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say an interesting related side note that in the sim space, that is a modern, fairly popular game that is a shooter sim is Arma. The Arma games are quite good. I haven't finished them all, but I've played each of them some, and they're basically military simulation, right? Like there's actual platoons of veterans as well as just hardcore folks. They get together and they have their own military hierarchy, and they go on these operations, and they're all on VoIP, and they get super deep into it, and it's very simmy as far as a shooter goes. So
yeah, well, and while we're on it, I mean, there's you mentioned Star Citizen last week. Now, I hadn't mentioned Elite Dangerous because I feel like the trading is a big aspect of those games, and I feel like it's almost a broader simulation in terms of the wider world. Yeah, so that it doesn't really fit necessarily as a it's a predecessor to this game. I think Elite is a little earlier. I may be wrong about that.
Elite's in the legacy, though. I mean, and Freelancer, and
for sure. Yeah. But also, House of the Dying Sun is one that
I've
came
heard
up,
about
and
that.
I've heard about it, but I haven't played it. If you've gone and gotten a joystick for this game, there's still games for you to play. Okay. Here's another email from Aaron Hansen. He also sent in a review. It says, started listening to your show when you were discussing Warcraft, and I really got into it. I really enjoy your analyses of these games I grew up with from a perspective I wouldn't have considered at the time. This time around, I've decided to play along with you. So there we go. We've got one. I dug out my joystick, remembered that it connects to my PC using an old 15-pin serial connection, tried playing without a stick for about 2 minutes, went to Best Buy for a new joystick, and then promptly realized that the last 20 years have dramatically changed the gaming scene, and likewise my expectation for all types of games. Nice. This game is hard and not at all intuitive. As you pointed out this week, it employs features, in quotes, and elements that would never be considered in new games these days. I love it, mostly.
Yeah.
He says, particularly Tim's comment regarding lasers running out of charge initially threw me way off as I tried to figure out just how many laser shots I would get before I ran out and was then forced to kamikaze into my target before I realized that there must be a way to recharge them, and read over my key bindings again. I didn't play TIE Fighter when I was young, but I did play XVT, and I really enjoyed it then. Having a blast going back and playing TIE now. Thanks for the show to you both. I love the insight and the banter. I'll probably get around to a 5-star review on iTunes, which he did. Thank you very much. But was hoping not to have to install it on any of my computers. Anyways, appreciative enough that he will. That'll be worth it. And so the review was, I started listening several games ago, and I'm hooked. I grew up playing many of the games they discuss, and it's really interesting listening to them and analyze them in ways I wouldn't have considered. The production quality is great, and the banter is fun. Thanks, guys, for the show. So, yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, for all of that. I also had to go get a joystick because I also realized that even if I still had the joystick, I don't think this laptop I'm playing on even has a 15-pin connection. I'm looking around.
15 pins.
I don't see one. So yeah, I had a Sidewinder or a Sidewinder Pro or something like that. We had those peripherals at LucasArts. Like they were around. There were it was a whole closet full of that kind of stuff, and so it wasn't hard to get them back then. But having them still work would have been something else. So, but yeah, good times.
Yeah, so I also had to go get one, and it's interesting. Had to kind of ask the Best Buy guy where they were, and they're kind of, on the bottom shelf, below a bunch of other stuff. And it kind of definitely a sign of the times where it's like, well, I guess these aren't really a thing anymore. Very, very little. I'm assuming, for instance, Star Citizen will be pretty optimized for controller, so.
Yeah, I would think so. And that's really where things have gone, is that especially with now, Bluetooth, a lot of computers, you can just hook up a PS4 controller, for example, that easily. I still have an Xbox wired controller that I use for the PC. So yeah, it's funny because I can almost never use it for the games we play. So it's interesting. All right, a couple more reviews. Here's one from Waka2234. If that is your real name. It says, "Fantastic show." That's the title. "This is an amazing gaming podcast. I've listened to every episode during my daily commute, and now can't wait for each week's new one. I love the behind-the-scenes insights, the host's incredible breadth of knowledge," I think he's talking about me then, "regarding games and game-making, and the awesome special interviews they do. Of all the praise I have for the show, the best thing they do, which a lot of other gaming podcasts don't, is stay well away from nostalgia bias. They play classics and are able to judge and criticize them. That is impressive and commendable. I love Warcraft 1, but I am so glad the host took the time to point out its flaws, too. Also, the bonus segments with cats and dogs in the background are hilarious. I couldn't stop laughing at them reviewing TIE Fighter while the Dark Cat Lord of the Sith meowed her displeasure."
Oh, man.
Yep. Good old James.
Yeah, I think that'll be a memorable episode for that reason.
It was pretty good.
She is locked out this time.
Yep. But yeah, I mean, I'm
glad,
it's
a good point.
I'm glad he's pointing that out, that we are trying to, to look at them critically, not just, fawningly.
Yeah. And I mean, nostalgia bias, that's a really good topic. And I think it's something that I'll definitely personally keep in check as much, because I think, we definitely play games with that we played in the past and have loved. So, and I definitely am such a fanboy about so many things. I have a tendency to do that. But for better or for worse, if you ever ask me to criticize a game, I'll definitely find things to say about it, because there is not a perfect game in existence, so there's always something to say about it, and it's it's what we do, so you can always find something.
And with any creative project, developing a game is an act of unrequited love. It's never done, it's never perfect. You just have to let it go.
Yeah.
And we've let go a lot of games, and both of us have got half a dozen games to our career at least. And and at some point they have to go out. The games that never come out or take 10 years, are often not nearly as good as you would expect that kind of time to be. I'm actually very concerned this week to have my copy of The Last Guardian arrive, a game that has been in development for 10 years, because I wonder. I just wonder.
Super fascinating.
Have I changed so much that it won't work, or, etc. But anyway. But thank you for the review, Waka2234. And then finally, Caught My Attention, Won't Let Go by Kurt Banff. He says, "First, I love game clubs, but my schedule doesn't allow me time to make that kind of commitment, so this is a great alternative. Second, as others have mentioned, Brett and Tim being developers means we get the unique perspective of industry professionals. And last, but most important to me, it's clear to me that both hosts are genuine fans of games. I used to assume everyone who worked in the industry loved games as much as I do, but insider horror stories in the media recently and my own experience getting my bachelor's in design showed that some people do just see it as simply a job. I love seeing examples of people with long careers in the game industry that haven't lost that genuine enthusiasm and wonder of their peers' art. Thanks for putting on a great podcast. So, food for thought there.
Yeah, sometimes it makes the industry doesn't make it easy.
Yeah, well, and I was gonna say that is that I will say it's very rare for somebody to have come into this generally you're coming to this because it's your passion, and I actually think there's a certain healthy self-regard in treating it as a job sometimes, because the companies aren't going to love you nearly as much as you're going to love the work you're doing. Yeah. That's just a fact. I think that, and especially as the industry has gotten more and more corporate and the bets have become bigger and bigger, and the risks, have become what they are. And there's a lot of public companies too, which have their own sort of pressures with balance sheets and quarterly reports and all that kind of stuff. I've been lucky. I've only ever worked for private companies. But yeah, when you add all that stuff together, you get corporations, which are essentially psychopaths. And it's good maybe to put a little bit of distance between you and that corporation and not tying so much. So I think some of that you hear about is kind of a response to that, of just like, oh, this is my 5th time I've gone through a cycle where I finished a game and I got laid off right afterwards. And, at that point you got to put up some walls. So I appreciate the point, and we do both genuinely love games. But I think that's more true of our peers than you might hear, for sure. Because something that's unusual is actually the news story, and not everybody who makes games loves games, which would not be news. So,
well, yeah, and I think
a lot of different things going on there.
Yeah, no, well said. And I think the other challenge the way I think about this often is, because I agree with him. I think most everyone, like, it's such a weird industry and such an interesting and different thing. Anyone who's coming in is doing it because they want to work on games, of course. But the stuff that tends to get in the way, I think, is when it starts dawning on people that this is also a business, right? And that there's a big aspect of game development that has nothing to do with games. That it's about making a product, it's about the business behind it, it's about team dynamics, it's about management. Like, there's all these other things that any team making software has to deal with, whether you're a game or not. And the game part is this additional, not additional, but it's the focus, but it's this other part of it that is the exciting thing, and it's the reason that a lot of us do it, but it's not the only thing at play. And I think when that starts dawning on people, then the job part of it comes in a little bit more, because you realize, you gotta pay the bills, the boss has to pay the bills, and all of this stuff. So
yeah, and you got to watch your health too, and I think people who don't treat it as a job, which I would describe as myself mostly at my LucasArts tenure, work too much, and get to the point where they're really endangering themselves. And that's part of our gift as artists. Like, what we do is not necessary. So just making a game in and of itself is kind of a gift to the people who are going to play it. But additionally, putting everything that you have of yourself into that, can be really exhausting. I'll throw a link up in the show notes for you, Kurt, that describes something that happened to me at the end of Jedi Starfighter, where one day I wasn't feeling well. I drove to the grocery store to get some saltines or something to settle my stomach, and when I got there, I couldn't get out of the car. I couldn't stand up. That's how tired and pushed beyond my limits I was. So
I did it.
You did it. You overheated the engines.
Yeah. I don't know if I'd ever, because I don't read anything you write, so I didn't.
No,
I don't know.
I'm well aware. Believe me. Jeez.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that brings us. Thank you all, by the way, for your
so cool.
your reviews and your emails. We really do appreciate them. That's why we try to read all of them. Sometimes I condense little bits of them, but we do try to get everything onto the cast. So thank you. We will continue to do that as long as you're going to grace us with those emails at devgameclub@gmail.com. You can find us on iTunes to give a review. If you send it from a non-English speaking country, or let's see, where else? I've gotten them from like Germany and a few other European countries, larger ones. But let us know, and I can actually go and subscribe to the iTunes feed so I can actually see your reviews, because I'm not checking that on a weekly basis. When I first discovered you could do that, we had some months to catch up. But I'd like to try to keep current with that if people let me know. So you can do that too, and we appreciate it. In the meantime, you can find the podcast on Twitter at DevGameClub. I am at Brett_Duville, and he is
at Tim Longo Jr. with a JR.
And we will see you next time. We're going to do, I guess, missions 8 through 10, or battles 8 through 10, I should say, which are the next 3.
Yeah, 3 and 3. So Defender of the Empire is the expansion pack, or Mission Disc, as they called them.
Mission Disc. Yes. All right. Well, then for Dev Game Club, good night.
Good night.
Da 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 da.
You gotta just rub that in. Yeah, it's too late.